This is Changeling the podcast. Welcome to Changeling the podcast, where the hedges are well trimmed and the hollows come with both a bang and a whimper. I am your host, Puka, and joining me is Fetch.
Pleasure to be here as always. And love how our intro changes slightly every time, just like the hedge.
I thought of that one while scrubbing dishes. I don't know if there's any kind of deep meaning behind that, but that's when it came to me, so yeah.
I'll save the joke for after we explain the hedge in better detail.
Yes. And so for tonight / this morning, because we're in different time zones, the topic of conversation will be the first edition Changeling the Lost Corebook.
Very excited to talk about this book because I have not read this since first edition. And in rereading it, I kept saying to myself, wait, no, I know this. This isn't a book I read, right? I know this artwork. And no, most of my memories of changing material are from this first edition core book. That's how strong of an impression it had on me.
Yeah. No, it was definitely, I know that when we talk about like the mists in the context of dreaming, it's like, oh yeah, what page was that on? Oh, I remember this now. The mists had obscured it, But it is kind of the same feeling of, oh, like I remember the visual impression of the pages in their entirety kind of striking my awareness, and then I get into the text and it's like, oh, right. Some stuff I don't remember at all, but other stuff, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that turn of phrase or whatnot.
I look forward to us describing Durances today if we get there.
So yes, this is a chomper of a core book. I think it's, like 390 pages, something ridiculous.
Something like that, which is impressive given that I think that makes it longer than the second edition core book, and that one includes a full rule set.
Yeah, this is sort of the maximalist school of core book writing, I feel, because it is very text dense. But I mean, it's, I'm along for the ride for sure.
Yeah.
And I forget if I know I've mentioned it on this podcast before, but the first time I read this was on a 10-hour train ride to Montreal, and I think I did read it cover to cover on the course of that entire trip. So
this is a fun book to just get yourself engrossed in. A lot of the writing we're going to be going over, I feel like it'll be hard to do justice to some of the verbiage that they use throughout the book.
Yeah. I don't know if fun is the word I would necessarily choose.
Okay, fun and engaging. It's an engaging book.
Yes, for sure. And let's talk for a minute about just the look of it, because, I mean, we talked about this a little bit with the Quick Start episode, I think, but just when they did the kind of monochromatic color scheme for each of the lines in the old New World of Darkness, they really hit the mark with Changeling, I think. Just that shades of green, it works really well.
It is my favorite color. The impaled moth, as Pete put it, is a beautiful aesthetic piece. And a subtler detail, if you look on the back middle part of it, there is a clock built in behind the horns.
Props to, I don't know if it was actually Rich Thomas who was art director on this. Creative director, okay. And Aileen Miles was art director. But kudos to them.
They knocked it out of the park. And this carries through the entire book, which is true for any of the New World or Chronicles books that you folks read. All of them have the monochromatic throughout. So when we describe a piece of imagery from the book, it's always going to be a monochromatic green style.
Yeah, but they make it sing.
Oh, gosh, do they ever. I have a few pieces picked out for when we get there.
Nice.
But this book is interesting because when we talked about New World, that was after White Wolf was kind of its own thing, but before the CCP acquisition. And this book gets released in 2007, which is after CCP took over.
Mm-hmm.
We should do a quick reminder that as part of the aesthetic, you get the game's name, Changeling the Lost, which is going to make people curious, because that sounds kind of different from what you would expect from the previous game, Dreaming, and it's a storytelling game of beautiful madness,
yes,
which we'll be diving into in more depths later, I think, as part of the themes, but I think that's a captivating tagline.
And it's not to say that Changeling the Dreaming can't also be a game of beautiful madness, but they're certainly starting from that perspective here and have specific ideas about what that means.
100%. So we'd started with the New World of Darkness core book, and at the same time, they'd released the Vampire the Requiem core book. This is just a reminder for everyone. The original plan was that Vampire, Werewolf, and Mage would be these unlimited game lines. Those ones had always been the ones that sell well. But that the would release other game lines with an idea of keeping them to limited runs. They did that for Promethean, which had, I think we said 5 or 6 books. And then they started doing that for Changing the Lost as well. And then it just spiraled from there because the game really took off. And that we've already covered the Quick Start, which was released prior to Gen Con, right?
Yeah, before this core book even.
Yeah, before the core book, and does a great job of introducing it. And now we're here. We have all this build up, and we get to finally talk about the changelings themselves.
Yeah, because this was, I think it was released at Gen Con in August 2007, or August 16th, now that I'm looking at my notes on this. But the decision to expand the line wasn't made until quite near the end. It was originally going to be released like a book every few months and was probably going to last for exactly 1 year, from August 2007 to August 2008. And then in April 2008 or thereabouts, they're like, you know what, let's expand it. So we're glad they did.
And the rest is history that we will hopefully get to talk about.
Yes.
A caution to our readers for the PDF. The PDF does not format easily to fit screen width. I am fiddling around with the settings on it, 150%. I don't like having to do that, but it is better than the original issue with the PDF when they first released it, which was every page took 1 or 2 seconds to load.
I mean, it's as dense with graphic layout stuff as it is with text, kind of. So these borders.
These borders are beautiful. You're always surrounded by the hedge.
Yeah.
So the chapters and then the intro story, do you think?
Yeah, well, so there aren't many chapters, to be honest. There's 4 proper chapters and 2 appendices and an introduction and a prologue. But whereas in most World of Darkness core books where you get like 8 or 9 chapters that are maybe 30 pages each or so, we have one that's about 50, one that's 100, and 2 that are about 60. So these are thick chapters, large chapters, if you will.
I settled down to read like 1 chapter a day and thought, oh,
Yeah.
this will take like under an hour easily. And then, no, it was a whole thing.
Yeah. But
So
anyway.
what we get is the prologue, what Alec Bourbon said. It's just a short story. The introduction, which will explain the themes of the game. Chapter 1, The World Behind the Mask, which is going to cover most of the setting elements, sometimes in broad strokes.
Mhm.
Chapter 2 gets us character creation, which is focused on just what you get out of being a changeling, because the rest of the stuff is covered in the Mortal core book. Chapter 3, special rules and systems, which will expand upon anything that wasn't covered by just the nature of being a changeling. Chapter 4, storytelling. Appendix 1, entitlements, which are the Z splat for the game. A little
Yes.
extra spice you can add on to your character. And Appendix 2, the Freehold of Miami. So if you are looking for a place to start an adventure and don't know where to go, this is their proposed solution.
The utility of which we can debate when we get to it.
Oh,
But,
yes. Now, I had a little hard time following the prologue story, so do you want to take this part?
I can't. Well, so we've talked about this before too, but we should probably give all the trigger warnings again up front, because this
That's
story
a good point.
contains alcohol, eye injuries, misogyny, violence. Like, I tried to keep a running list, and then I just thought, you know what? Let's just reiterate that this entire game could probably benefit from warnings on almost every page. So your mileage may vary with how many of these various issues you want to put up with. That being said, though, this story does quickly hit a lot of the key notes of the world. We have this character, Alec Bourbon, who, as we learn, is a changeling of some kind. He seems to have this uncanny influence over others and the world to some small degree. He's this barfly that hangs out at a bar, and it's like, when his song comes on, he says, Alec Bourbon said, everybody do this, and everybody does it. How curious. We learn about pledges and fetches and some other elements a bit. I think overall, I don't want to spoil it too much. It gets grisly. We can say that.
That the line that will never leave me is, "I have a gift for you, and if you can guess what it is, I won't give it to you."
Hmm. And she guesses 3 times, and wrong each time. I'd also say it points to themes and moods because, like, you remember in the New World of Darkness core book, we had the mysterious and the uncanny as guiding elements. But here, it's like there's a callousness that I don't think the core book necessarily had. Like you could have these kind of grim dark, dare I say, and amoral or immoral characters in the mix, like when we had the story about the woman going for the job interview and whatever else. But here it's like you really get a feel for how bitter some of these characters may be. So that was something which stood out to me here.
I had not thought about that, but it is a good point. I feel like there's even a poignant moment with how they describe the almost resignation that Alex
Yeah.
Bourbon goes throughout his strange adventure.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, it's a story. Also, quick shout out to the credits page. You mentioned this in our interview last time, but the acknowledgement here about the crew that developed this book giving respect to the people that came before who developed Changeling as a game. I don't really understand why you have these edition wars where, like, okay, it's fine to have a preference, but then it evolves into just kind of like saying really nasty stuff about people who like the other game. And I just feel like if the creators of this game could be kind towards streaming, I don't understand the dismissiveness I've seen in the past from some fans. But anyway,
I think reading things like this is good. I'll be honest with you,
yeah.
Puka, that I used to be one of the more edition warsy kinds of people, and then I had a reality check from some podcast episode where they were game designers who were talking about, oh, their favorite games. And I don't remember if it was Chronicles of Darkness or if it was a Gumshoe game, but they say, yeah,
Mhm.
like we also play Dungeons and Dragons. Or I remember someone bringing up how much they liked working on, it was Masquerade or Requiem, and they get people saying, oh, I bet you hate everybody who likes the other game, or you hate all other games. And
Right.
it doesn't really work that way in the industry. They don't have that kind of rivalry, and they also don't have that kind of internal edition warring that some fans pick up on.
Well, and 99.9% of them don't have the luxury because they just need the work. So,
That is also fair. But to the sweetness of the point, I do like they acknowledge that this is building on the legacy of Dreaming and Dark Ages Fae, even if they did go very much in their own direction with it.
for sure. I'd like to think that there was this big kind of like group hug sort of feeling in the writers' room. I know that's probably not true, but I think they all at least respected each other and appreciated each other's contributions. Or so I hope. Anyway, introductions time. And we do have, as is usual, a little 1-page story to open each of these, but
Oh, yes, this one was sad. A woman wanders into the hedge looking for her son. She in
oh. Sorry, I thought it was babysitter. That's how I read it.
huh. I might have to reread it. Either way, she encounters a changeling enslaved to one of the true Fae who tells her to go back home. When she returns, she's lost time and her son's been replaced by something else, which is a fetch. Her son or the kid she was babysitting, I guess, whichever it was.
Either way, not great for him or her.
No, not at all. But after that, we get into the introduction, and every chapter opens up with a little quote.
Mhm.
This one is, be easy, answered the Nix. I will make thee richer and happier than thou hast ever been before. Only thou must promise to give me the young thing which has just been born in thy house. From the Nixie of the Mill Pond, as recorded by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. And then I think which is a pretty decent explanation of the game's mood and themes, along with a nice summary of what people are going to find in the rest of the book.
Yeah, and in broad strokes, we did talk about this to some degree with the quick start episode. Changelings are those who are abducted to Arcadia. They return to find the world change. Often they have a fetch to deal with, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
So,
And I think we can save the deeper discussion then for the later chapters because they do get more into the themes of trying to find your way home, more metaphorically at this
yeah,
point.
home may not be what you thought it was.
The mood, which I think they beautifully capture throughout the book, is bittersweet. As we'll see throughout this book, almost everything they describe has something that is cool and uplifting about it, but then also has a downside to it, or vice versa.
Yeah. I would say also both Dreaming and Lost seem to struggle against the threat of nihilism, but in different ways. Like the idea of what oblivion or undoing or the end is differs between the two games, but they're both kind of consumed with struggling against it in their own way.
I cannot wait to get to talking about the weird rating and what that does to your poor,
Yeah.
poor changeling soul.
There's also a bit in here. I'm probably going to say this like 5 times because it does keep coming up again and again, but I think this is the first place where it mentions that in the context of beautiful madness that we've talked about before, you have this contrast that they spell out between the external, which is like fairy and its inherent outsideness with respect to human rationality, and the internal, which is the Fae's own capital C clarity, being able to distinguish mundane reality from the Fae stuff. So that idea of duality as a theme that I like to point to in Dreaming, here the expression of it is much more the internal versus the external.
They emphasize it too, in that they have a point after theme and mood about being between worlds, where
Mhm.
you might think that some changeling just wants to go back to their mortal life, but now that they've seen the wonders of fairy, they really can't. And if they want to be able to protect themselves, they arguably should go engage more with the dangers that they are trying to escape from.
Yeah.
It's complicated for them. And that's really, I mean, isn't that like the premise of a good game is you
I mean,
have
yeah.
2 strong poles? I want to be mortal, but I need to be fey.
At least two, if not more. Multiple spectra, maybe, kind of intersecting with each other. Maybe we should make a diagram.
A diagram of all the poles for the game. I
Something.
like that.
Yeah. Anyway,
After that, we get a brief rundown of what is going to be in each of the chapters, which I always appreciate. Then sources and inspirations, a pretty good set of overall of nonfiction, fiction, poetry, and movies. Naturally, Labyrinth, well, and Pan's Labyrinth are both in here. I can't help but think almost every game of the Fae wants to be one of those two.
well, nowadays at least. I admit, kind of going through and being like, check, check, check.
There are several books that I had bought specifically because Changeling lists sources of inspiration. Do you look at the inspiration lists for games and then
Oh,
hunt
yeah.
down that material?
Not necessarily hunt down, but keep an eye out for maybe. And I mean, there's plenty of other stuff which I'm sure informed this book that they didn't mention, and that has been written
Can't
since, which I'm
everything.
sure was informed by it. So yeah, I also really appreciate how they called out poetry as, what did they say at some point? Like, take a poetry collection, read a poem at random, and there's the seed for a hedge encounter or story hook. And as someone who moved in the world of poetry for many years, I do really, yeah, I think that's true. And it's not something that you often see in these lists. They usually point to, complete texts. So,
That's a good point. I highly recommend to our listeners, whether we're talking about Dreaming, Lost, or any other game, if they do have a list like this, and I really hope they do, check out some of the inspiration, especially if you are new to it. It's a fantastic way to get into the themes of the game.
yes, get thee to a library.
And after that, last thing we get is a lexicon. I always feel weird about these because it's you're getting these terms with very little context before
Yeah,
then, but they are nice to have.
yeah. It's good to flip back to when you need it. And I had forgotten about all of the Oniro prefix words, and it's one of my favorite prefixes. So I was like, ooh, yes.
Oneiromancy, Oneiromaki,
Oniro bump.
Oneirovore.
Yeah, it's great.
Yes.
So good. Anyway.
That's all I've got on the introduction.
I think that's all I've got too. I'm ready to move into chapter one because we should keep it at a brisk clip for this one.
All
um,
right.
so,
With chapter one, we open with the intro story of, I think it's a person getting attacked, a changeling getting attacked by a privateer, but I was
mhm.
really not 100% sure what's going on here.
I sort of felt like it might be like a former Fae that the protagonist had known in their durance, but yeah, it could be a privateer
Oh,
too.
okay.
Certainly, it's a changeling betraying changeling situation. So,
While not one of my favorites, I do still appreciate that they have these one-page opening pieces of
yeah,
fiction for every chapter.
it kind of makes me wonder, especially in this day and age when we think about role playing games as this kind of technology as they use in some contexts, if in addition to thinking about themes and moods, which I love thinking about, we also need to think about like lessons or takeaways. And maybe the one that I want to think about with Changeling the Lost is the tension between strategic essentialism and self interest, which I think I mentioned in our conversation with Pete the other day. But
I vaguely recall it was 5:30 a.m. for me.
that's true, yes. For anyone who's unaware with the term strategic essentialism, it's this idea of within this umbrella term, if you talk about queer as a group, the subdivisions within that have different sort of individual interests. There are points in time when you all kind of need to band together to fight for rights for everybody because together you're all still a minority. And then other times when you need to fight for the rights of an even smaller subgroup within that minority. So that I kind of feel like plays out here in the sense of all changelings together working against the keepers or whatever, but then you have the individual needs of each seeming and each court and each individual changeling. So navigating when to fight for yourself or advocate for yourself and when to band together with people who maybe you only have your shared trauma in common. It's like figuring that out is the practice that you could potentially take from the game into the world. I do think that this is World of Darkness, so maybe you want to be a little bit more optimistic out in the world. But it is that if we talk about practicing how to do these things within a contained space of a role playing game, that's something which I'm looking for now as I go through this.
I think we should keep in mind opportunities to talk about that as we go through chapter one, because I think we're going to get quite a few of them when we get to Changeling Life.
Oh, yes. Because, yes, this is the everything and then some setting chapter, the entirety of the Fey life world. All right. So we start with Arcadia. Well, actually, we start with a Christina Rossetti quote from the poem Goblin Market, which is, "She ran and ran as if she feared some goblin man, dogged her with jibe or curse or something worse." And goblin markets are a thing that will come up later.
So excited!
Anyway, the first header we get, and the headers get a little bit wonky, but we have Arcadia the Perpetual Twilight. The book points out that aside from being a Greek prefecture and a mythical utopia, it is also the domain of the Fae, beautiful and terrifying and labyrinthine and mutable. It is the, quote, nightmare from which there is no waking, outside the laws of reality as humanity knows it. The creatures that dwell there define and redefine it and its nature through agreements and contracts. And generally speaking, humans don't keep their sanity for long if they visit. This is the dwelling place of the keepers from which the changelings have emerged.
And just like that, we have a fantastic summary of the surreality and fascination that this brings, which will
Mm-hmm.
only become more profound as we go through it. Side note, for those who hear Arcadia and think Mage the Awakening, you may be interested to know that I know they bring it up in Lost. I'm not sure whether they ever discuss it in Mage the Awakening itself, but the Arcadia of this game is not the Arcadia
No.
of that game. But hilariously, the mages within the setting know that changelings have a place called Arcadia, and some of them think it's the same, and they try going there. There is a antagonist from one of the supplements when we get to it that I look forward to talking about, and it is what exactly happens to a mage when we get there. Then we get into the true Fae themselves. So these are the keepers, the gentry, the inhabitants of Arcadia, this wonderland of dreams and nightmares to which mortals have been taken. The book gives a lot of information about what the Fae are or are not. I'll start with a basic distinction that's really easy to miss. The book will often use the term Fae in lowercase to describe anything associated with the game line. Changelings, hobgoblins, the keepers. But if you ever see Fae capitalized or true Fae, that refers explicitly to the gentry themselves.
Yes.
And what are the gentry? No, seriously, what are the gentry? To paraphrase Brian David Gilbert, the changelings do not really understand what they are, though we open up with this description of them. Oftentimes, they appear to be the elegant she of legend, but they can be just about anything. I'm realizing that the more things I want to say about the True Fae are not even in this opening section, so
Well, there's a bit I think later maybe where it says they're defined not by what they are, but by what they do. And I think that is very telling. Like they almost don't have any identity except what they decide to take on a whim, you know. And I mean, it is a
yes.
powerful whim. They reshape their reality around them to execute it, but fundamentally, there's nothing behind that, or nothing comprehensible behind it.
It's true. They talk about how the horrible bog monster you meet one day might, a decade later, be some handsome and terrifying noble prince.
Yeah.
Because it's about the contracts they have and the stories. They have an alien mindset. They
Mhm.
don't think like humans do.
Something that I wanted to point out is that in this section, there's the implication that they are these fundamentally external entities who adopt shapes from human cultures. And I suspect that this is like they thought this was a lesson learned from dreaming. They're like, okay, we're going to make these, you know, deculturated from the start. We're going to make them these universal abstracts. But I'm curious about your opinion about whether this is a good thing. Because what you end up with is here are these unknowable entities descending to Earth and taking on shapes from folklore. Whereas in dreaming, it's the folklore is almost gaining its own consciousness to express itself. And it's an interesting reversal, but I don't know.
I'm personally a fan.
Hmm.
They have a beautiful section called The Abduction, which is about the various kinds of kidnapper legends
Yeah.
that exist. And later on, they talk about how people abducted by UFOs, ufologists, are making the mistake of thinking this is something new when it's still something old. I think part of the beauty of changing the lost and of the New World Darkness in general is that they are able to thread a needle whereby the Fae are fundamentally unknowable beings to the point that changelings are really guessing. The things that we say are true statements are just guesswork. But at the same time, the idea is that they're the ones that influence at least some of these legends. And then the practicality becomes that if you want to say you were taken by the big bad wolf or the fairy she, or you saw that awesome horse and you're like, I'm going to ride it right into the water,
Well, who
apparently.
wouldn't?
You know, who wouldn't? And it's good. Like, it explains a lot of things that are super weird, like Krampus taking, kidnapping kids or ufology. It's a nice crock pot that breaks down into something understandable when we get to the individual legends. And I think it works well, especially because let's not forget, most of the original World of Darkness was very Western facing for a variety of reasons.
Yeah,
And that wound up kind of biting them when they talked about places outside of a,
sure.
Euro American atmosphere.
Yeah, I just kind of wonder if this solution is kind of too much in the other direction because fundamentally, not every fairy story from around the world is an unmitigated bad thing for the mortals. And to say, oh, well, this legend that your people had, oh, that was just an external entity taking a shape. I can imagine that there might be equally problematic, maybe not as many problematic moments with that, but I don't know. I don't feel ready to fully weigh in on that question. It's just something that stood out to me, but I don't want to hang us up too much on it at
Two,
this point.
two quick points to take maybe a little sting out of that
Mhm.
wound before we move on from there is that one, I think the games are careful to make it clear. Like, for example, they talk about kidnapping, but they make it clear that not every kidnapping is secretly one
Right.
of the
Yeah.
Fae. And I think they're very careful to say, although one of the Fae might look like a god or a famous monster, that doesn't mean that they actually are that.
Fair.
The other thing is that for the more lighthearted and gentle stuff, I think that's where they leave the design room for the changelings. But speaking of which,
Yeah, let's
from the true Fae, we move on to talking about what actually happens to people who get taken and how that
Yeah.
works.
So we get kind of like a little biographical arc of subheaders here. So let's get into it. We start with the abduction, and it is a nice little exegesis about the kind of social and cultural function of fairy stories, like about enforcing conformity, even though obviously we don't have banality here, around the world. And sometimes abductees return, sometimes not. The archetypes of abduction that we have here are the stolen child. This is in reference in the context of changelings to the ones taken in as children, wards, before they know any better. The hunt, which is when older captives are taken as a test of true Fae skill. The dance, when the mortals are seduced or cajoled into the hedge by everything from ghost lights to attractive people. And sometimes just luck, for better or for worse. You just stumble into the gentry and they take a shine to you.
You look useful.
Yeah.
Note that the game waffles on how much the Fae actually take children.
Mhm.
This book has an interesting point that the Fae find that taking little kids is easier because they're less likely to escape, and they have, due to human lifespans, they have a longer time to have with them.
Mhm.
But although they can be molded towards your ends, they tend to be less useful and require more care, and they don't, well, content warning for bad things happening to children. A lot of them just don't survive, which is why the Fae, not out of any sense of care or concern, prefer to hunt down older targets. They say at least 5 or 6, which is still very young,
Yeah.
but in general, they're looking for somebody who's got something that is going to fit with their personal narrative.
Yeah. So the next piece of the arc we get is the durance. This is the period of captivity, which is marked by strange, or maybe more accurately, stylized and particular emotional valences. Like, oh, the true Fae is going to be your parent now. But it's almost like they, like a goblin anthropologist made a checklist and wrote parent at the top in crown, and now the true Fae is like, yes, I will do these things and be the parent. So,
Going through the motions is how it
yes,
sometimes feels.
playing emotions, going through the motions of emotions. Some of the expressions that we get here are changes, which points out that the thorns of the hedge, as a changeling is kind of, I guess, taken in, dwelling among them, and then as they leave, which I'll get to that in a second, those thorns in the hedge rip away at the soul, fundamentally scraping off bits of humanity and essentially changing who the individual is. And then the section titled An Offer You Cannot Refuse points out this absolute reliance on contracts and oaths to define fairies' reality. Everything from the birds in the sky to the heat of the fire and all of that. And even returned changelings must adhere to some extent to those contracts. They're doubly bound by both human and fae needs in that regard.
There is a point they make that a lot of changelings who get kidnapped, they might at first try to resist, but unless you go into the contracts the Fae have, you don't benefit from things like
Mhm.
that. Fire will not warm you, food will not nourish you.
Yeah, I love that part. Gotta make the deals.
Oof.
So then there's the escape, and this is maybe what defines the changelings the most. They've returned to Earth. Some used guile, some used force, some were apparently set free. All of them constantly worry about whether they are truly free, and this is when it says player or pawn in the header, or they wonder whether their freedom is temporary, part of some unknowable game designed by their keeper.
There's a unsettling piece late in the game. I think it's in the freehold section where they describe one changeling is low clarity and is never sure he's actually
Mhm.
escaped. Because one of the things their keeper did is set up as a prank a fake escape, let the person return to living what seemed like a normal life, and then just when they were settled in, pull back the veil and goes, "Ha ha! You never got away."
Yeah, and there's there's a lot of that energy through this game. So yeah. But if they do make it back, and they think that they are truly in the clear, the section entitled Home Again talks about the return to the mortal world and attempting to reintegrate. We get the section Stranger in a Strange Land, which highlights that becoming aware of and transformed by the Fae leaves one not fully part of either the Fae or the human world, and what that means. Seemings and Kiths, meanwhile, discusses how the nature of one's captivity plays a part in how the body and soul are reshaped, and we'll get more details about those in the next chapter. Time and Ties points to how the different passage of time in Arcadia can leave a changeling ill-adjusted for the mortal world they come back to, both relative to the kin that they left behind, because it's like, if you think you were only gone for a few hours and you were gone for decades, then your family will have grown old, your friends will have moved away, etc. Conversely, if you think you were gone for 20 years, but you were only gone for a few hours, you may have been a child and you're returning to your parents as a grown adult. So there's that relative anachronism. And then just the anachronism of the world at large has changed, how that might affect you.
Before we go on to the next part, this is a great time to mention that where and how you escape is something of an exercise of willpower and recall.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the changelings who make it back to the mortal world are the ones who have strong memories of people, places, or things that they loved, and that's what guides them back to our world.
Yeah. They may not even realize that they have those connections as they're making their escape until they come back.
Right.
So then there's the fetches. These are the replacements made of junk and shadow, basically, left behind in the abductees' place to live out their stolen life. I think it's a piece of their shadow, right? That's like what animates it.
It is, according to Changing Legend, a piece of the shadow of the mortal who got taken.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then Memory and Clarity sketches out the balance between human and Fae realities without losing themselves. This is represented by the capital C Clarity trait that we'll get to later. First Contact, you recall my anecdote about that. This section sketches out how things can go when a changeling first meets others of their kind, usually associating themselves with a freehold for support and mutual protection and community, especially because, as this part of the text points out, changelings feel this need to be around their own kind. I don't know that there's like a mechanical penalty for not hanging out with changelings, the same way that there kind of is in dreaming, but it's definitely made clear here.
No, there isn't a mechanical penalty if you don't hang out
Yeah.
with changelings. I think they kind of make that a thing in second edition, but in first edition, it's just the more you hang out with the anything Fae, the worse it is for your mental stability.
Yeah. Finally, New Starts or Reclaiming the Old presents a defining choice for each changeling. Do they try to get back into their old life, or do they try to make a new start as best as they can? Something that each player and I guess character will have to wrestle with on their own. Would you say that people more often focus on like the durance part of this or the home again part of this as the defining backstory piece of their characters?
Oh, that is a great question. I think that,
Because I would say
yeah,
durance, but
I'm thinking of all of the examples from the games that I've
mm-hmm.
run of it, and in every instance I can think of, the players were defined by their durance. I was
Yeah,
the Knight of Storms, or I was the Dungeon Master.
right. It's interesting, isn't it? Like, it makes me wonder if that was how the creators of the game way back in 2007 would think of that. I'm gonna have to go compare that with second edition and see how it vibes. Um, Anyway, the last bit here is the hedge, and this is, again, the thorny maze surrounding fairy that can manifest in many ways, but it's always liable to get its trespassers lost, whether it takes the form of ghastly stinking bogs or immaculately landscaped Victorian hedgerows, as it says here. The subsections are entry and egress, which talks about how theoretically you can access the hedge from basically anywhere, but it's definitely easier in certain locations. And then trods and hollows, respectively, talk about the paths through the hedge from which issue glamour, and the small hidey holes in the hedge that are, I know that when we talked with Pete, he was like, oh yeah, having hollows, it's awesome. And I'm like, I think it's kind of a mixed blessing. But Like hanging out in the hedge long term seems like asking for
You
trouble.
probably shouldn't hang out in the hedge long term, but
Nah,
hey, it's nice to have a little clubhouse sometimes where
true.
you can
Yeah,
go into the realm of the Fae and feel at least secure because you're not just out there dealing with whatever's coming your way.
yeah.
Weird point about the trods, despite the fact that they emphasize you gotta hold on to those trods, they're the big source of glamour. I don't think the book has any game mechanics for glamour doing anything with trods. As far as I can tell, the only interesting thing about a trod is that it's a convenient way of getting from one place to another, not a way of skimming glamour. And in fact, if you're that leaves the only other concern being getting into the hedge, which we'll talk about later. But basically, changelings can do it whenever they want by just knocking on any portal
Right. Yeah.
and then opening it up. Mortals can wind up there too accidentally. It's usually a response to someone has like a really strong desire, especially to fulfill a vice, or they accidentally do the right ritual and a portal leads them in. But the idea of trots having anything to do with glamour, I don't see in the game, which is kind of too bad because I feel like they really want to make that a big part of the game in this section.
I guess it's like if you go in one, you'll find goblin fruit. Maybe I don't
I
know.
guess that's I guess that's true. The last thing I want to say before we go into Changing Life is that although the descriptions given so far are of literal mazes, you should feel free to get weird
Oh yeah.
with it. Make it a concrete jungle. Take your favorite big city and have it an endless series of alleyways. Or let them climb up onto the rooftop and see that it just stretches off into the vast distance like a directionless desert.
Yeah, I was gonna say a flat landscape with a featureless horizon is a really creepy thing. Anyway, Changeling Life.
Changeling Life. Okay, so this is all about what is it like when you finally get back into here and you try to set up a new life for yourself.
It's tough.
The subsections for this are history and modernization, which, to my surprise, it says changing society is considerably more conservative than mortal
Hmm.
society. And they say it's because of the sheer age of the changelings, but maybe that's just my optimistic heart. But I've always thought of changelings as being more progressive.
I would suggest that they're maybe very open minded about some things and just totally can't even conceptualize some others. But yeah.
That makes sense. After history modernization, there's safety. How do changelings feel safe when part of them is constantly telling them that there's no such thing as real rules in the world? It's all just contracts. And then another part of them wants to believe that none of these horrors ever happened to them. And they inherently have trouble trusting anybody, even each other.
Mhm.
We get subsections about trust, hospitality, and secrecy, which boils down to the idea that most freeholds are going to understand that somebody who just escaped from the hedge doesn't understand what's going on. They've spent maybe a few days, maybe a month trying to regain their normal life. They've found somebody else has stepped into it. They're having trouble trusting their senses. So the freehold has a habit of, when you're on the same bus as someone else and you both see that, oh, you have blue skin, you have horns. Okay, we need to have a conversation because I clearly don't know who you are. How that leads to them providing support, which eventually leads into the idea of joining the freehold, which is a general name for changing society within a city, or the courts, which are the individual support groups and ways of responding to the Fae that we'll talk about later.
Momentarily.
Yes, the part I like most about this is two things. One, that changelings have access to pledges. So you can make a promise with someone else and hold them to it. And changelings are kind of antsy about whether or not they want to do that because they don't want to be bound to anything again.
Mhm.
But they also feel an urge to do it because at least then you've got some security, right?
Yeah. I have in my notes an externalized structure of reassurance.
And I just like the bit in hospitality about how changelings will mark out areas and say,
Right?
hey, if you come here, nothing bad is going to happen to you. Here's my personal oath that you will be safe. And I thought that's beautiful that they want to have these locations where people can come and feel safe and normal.
Indicated with stickers.
Yes, there's a cute picture of somebody pointing out beyond a couple fences, like, hey, look at that symbol over there. That's the safe place.
The cat of truth and hospitable good times. This is the new Changeling NPC that I'll be creating.
After that section, we get into territoriality. This gets more into the idea of where do changelings congregate. It tends to be in
Waltham, Massachusetts, for some reason. There must have been a playtest group at Brandeis. That's the only reason I can think of. But anyway, sorry, go on.
Well, no, the whole thing is that they tend to congregate naturally because people remember the places they came from, and there's the thing where a lot of the major trods that get discovered are in cities, so freeholds tend to congregate in cities and around trods. It's just the most likely place that people are going to show up. Then we get freeholds themselves, which the description here, I'd always assumed that a freehold was like the city itself. But there's a section in one of the appendices with the entitlement, I think the Margraves of the Border Marches, that makes it sound like a freehold could be a much smaller kind of place. How big do you picture them? Because I see citywide.
I mean, it says local changeling communities, which, depending on the size of the city in question and how many changelings are present, like how local is local, it's hard for me to conceptually shift from thinking of it as a place to thinking of it as a group of changelings too, even though it's, there's overlap. Yeah, however many your story needs. That's my answer. Certainly big enough for courts to rotate.
Oh, yeah, which we'll get into now. The freehold itself, you can gain ranks in freehold, representing your overall respect that you have there, but the actual power structure varies. In North America and Europe, they mostly have the 4 seasonal courts: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. But those aren't the only courts that exist in those areas. And in other places, they have other courts, which do get their own write-ups in later books. The idea behind the courts is that the Fae often try to zero in on changelings by seemingly sympathetic magic, picking up on the vibe of longing and remembrance for Arcadia, or the general vulnerability of a changeling who is wandering around the world and doesn't know what they're doing. And the courts, regardless of which court system we're talking about, give the changelings some way of responding to what the true Fae are doing to them. And that gives them a kind of power, which also makes it more difficult for the true Fae to find them.
There's that nice bit, I can't remember if it's here or later on when it actually goes to the courts in detail, where it's like the changelings back in history decided to affiliate themselves with seasons because the voluntary rotation of power was something that the true Fae couldn't understand, and that was like a form of concealment.
Yes, that's like the most important part, and I totally blanked on it. Thank you. The true Fae are inherently selfish beings, and they cannot understand any kind of handing off of power.
Yeah.
In one of my own games, I have a place that has the courts of heaven and hell.
Ooh.
And their way of handling it is that the angels and demons for the courts, as they would call themselves, do not ever get into direct conflict. And when they want to resolve something, they always make a bet on a mortal.
Nice.
Continuing from there, we get some stuff about a section called Tolerance and Madness. We get to some grim and hopeful stuff in equal measure about...
That's a rough section, I have to say.
It is a rough section. I think that one would be handled differently today.
Well,
I appreciate the general sentiment, which is that because all changelings have been through trauma, the freehold often is very accepting of eccentricities and often really terrible things that people have done.
Yeah.
And sometimes they let that go too far, and they don't realize before it's too late that, no, this person isn't just going through with something, their toxicity is bleeding out, or they've become a very bad person that we can no longer deal with.
Yeah.
From there, we get into mortal society. Just what are your options for reintegrating into your old life. Some of them kill their fetch and try to take back their life. Others chat with their fetch and say, hey, can we work something out? Some of them take back their life and find themselves turning their mortal families into thralls because they try to go stealth and they can't explain all the inconsistencies.
Mhm.
Some of them try to tell their family about it or wind up stalking them, which is really unsettling. And others play superhero, which I found to be a surprising statement to drop in that the Fae are good at seeing the weird parts of the world and sometimes they want to get involved in that.
I just want to briefly point out that one of the other solutions is the leading of double lives, where it's like they're trying to live as a human with their family, but then also hang out as a changeling with their fellow changelings. And I'm like, oh, it's Changeling the Dreaming. There you go.
I think that's the part with the multiple personalities, isn't it?
Well, yeah, also that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's a nice concept, although I think maybe they didn't need that part.
probably not. Because the other thing is that the freehold provides everything from fake IDs up to killing off your fetch for you as this kind of combination clubhouse, as you said, slash mutual support network slash whatever else.
The Jack Catch service, as they
Yeah.
call it.
Oh, I did also like, I mean, I think it's interesting, I should say, the note that whatever sort of bad things a changeling may get up to, banishment is seen as one of the most severe punishments alongside execution. But the things that will never happen are imprisonment, enslavement, and returning someone to the Fae, because those are seen as just like so much like what the keepers do, and in line with the trauma they all went through, that a freehold will not do those as punishments. It's like, it's an interesting aspect. Anyway, courts.
Courts.
So the courts are these big affiliations that expand the freehold style structures. They're larger networks of aid and gossip. There are more opportunities to get involved, more pledges available for more power. And yes, this is where it's the tied to the seasons thing. The write-ups cover the nature of the court's founding, generally in the Dark Ages, the courtiers' ways of being, their rituals and their heraldry, and the ways that they embody the emotion that each court is associated with. We have Spring, which was founded by Mother Susan. It is the court of desire in all its forms, both embracing it, because changelings will not allow the Fae to steal all joy from them, and encouraging it, because laughter has power over terror.
I refer to them in my notes as the very extra court.
Yes.
And I love that.
Brilliant. They try to live elegantly and vivaciously. They have their spring revel where they honor an individual for their performances. They are sociable and worldly and sensual. All that good stuff.
There's a cute bit in there where they talk about how they want to help people, and their example is playing a mad scientist to inspire your mortal lab assistant.
Yep. So they're intriguing. Then we have Summer, founded by Sam Noblood, the Crimson Court, or the Court of Wrath. They rage at the memory of what their captors did to them. They're more combative and willing to fight off the Fae, as well as other types of supernaturals. Courtiers are always strong in some fashion, but not always physically, like they might have some other kind of mental strength or social strength. And they frequently engage in contests with each other for practice, and also as a pressure valve to let off some of their own steam. They try to remember that anger can be righteous rather than petty. I did really like how they said sometimes they cause traffic jams just to frustrate mortals and harvest the wrath. It's like, yes.
Honestly, it's the harvesting glamour moments in this game that make me feel like this is when it's most like dreaming.
Yes.
Did you remember there's the ritual where, because all the courts have their rituals, and one of the summer courts one is the one where they try to one up all of the other courts
Yes.
at their specialties.
But the thing is, too, Summer, it talks about, competitions are important because when you're in a competition, you're filled with that rage. You just want to beat the other person. And I'm like, I would say desire in the spring court is just as much a piece of it, like the desire to win. But I guess you could also argue autumn, the fear of losing, and sorrow from winter, the actual losing. Winter joins and just intentionally loses to be sad and get stronger from it. I don't know. So then the autumn court, founded by Clay Ariel, the Ashen Court, or Court of Fear, encourages subtlety, knowledge, magic, and discretion. They often explore the hedge and might be scared to admit their own attraction to the power of Arcadia, and that fear which they feel is matched by the kind that they create in others. They are sorcerous and oblique. They show off their talents at their yearly Fallen Fair. And yet they also join with Summer, hitching their fear to Summer's wrath for their own variety of hunt with a capital H.
Other parts of the book mention this as well, but I think they really emphasize to the Autumn Court that despite how we said that the New World of Darkness is narratively disconnected between game lines, Changing the Lost is very much about connecting with other game lines at some points, and the Autumn Courtiers explicitly deal with other
Yes,
supernaturals.
they're the ones.
Did you feel like they did a good job with the fear? Because I felt like it was a little disconnected from the rest of the description.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels a little bit soft here. I imagine, if I recall correctly, Autumn Nightmares maybe kind of gets into it a little bit more, but yeah. So finally, we have Winter, founded by Snowflake John, the Onyx Court or Court of Sorrow that is secretive and deadly, hiding in plain sight when they can and disappearing when they can't. They have a winter market for collecting and sharing information. Many new changelings instinctively join the Winter Court because the impulse is to hide, and that's what they do, but sticking with Winter Court isn't for all of them, because changelings sometimes have other emotions. Winter courtiers wield guilt and regret more than cruelty to cause sorrow, echoing their own.
The Winter Court is another one that I think got a good punch up in later books. In
Mhm.
this one, they come across as kind of passive or even cowardly sometimes to me,
Mhm.
which is not the vibe I've gotten from other material. And you do see hints of the cool stuff here. Like, they may be the ones which hide and go to ground, but they're also the ones that have all of the assassins for the Freehold.
So we've talked about how Dark Ages Fae kind of informed some of these seasonal courts. And if I'm remembering rightly, Autumn in Dark Ages Fae is more about the mystery and the curiosity stuff, and Winter is about the outright causing fear, like the full on monsters. And I feel like maybe that's part of why it feels blurry between these two.
Oh, interesting.
In all cases, though, I mean, this is another example of that internality versus externality with the emotions. We've talked about madness coming from both inside and outside. Here, it's the courts are keyed to the emotions of the individual changelings internally, and then externally, they create that emotion in the world around them, which they then can feed off of. So it's like this feedback loop kind of thing. And then there are the courtless who don't fit into any of them. So,
Yes, and it's surprisingly common given the benefits of it. You do have a
yeah.
decent courtless population earlier in the book where they talk about how are people seen if they don't participate in the freehold at all. And they're seen as either moochers who come in to take freehold resources or mysterious knight errants who pop out and come to help the freehold for in its
Anarchists.
time of needs. Oh, 1 to 6 or 7 changelings is a lot, by the way.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite court?
In first edition, I think my favorite would have to be Spring because
Yeah.
they just feel so vivacious and fun, and let's take changeling magic and do cool stuff with it. Even though Autumn has the spooky, edgy stuff that I kind of like, I think I like Spring a little bit more. In second edition, it becomes Winter because I really love them as the ones that try to ground you in your mortal life and help you adjust. And a lot of my games deal with questions of sorrow and regret and how do you overcome those in a healthy way.
Right on.
How about yourself?
Hands down Spring. First edition, it's got to be Spring. And it's funny because I think Spring is the only court that I actually haven't played a character. So
Oh,
go figure. So after all of that, to round out the chapter, we have a few threats, and the ones that we get here are the fetches. I do really like the little story hooks that they give to introduce these. It really shows that the fetches often believe that they are the abductee living their lives out, sometimes for the better, but then sensing what they are when the changeling draws near upon returning to the world, and then they manifest powers of their own. It's like, harbingers of winter
that's
vibes.
tragic.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
The fetch is sometimes different from how you were. So it is entirely possible for you to be cis het. You go through your durance, come back, and you're
Hmm.
still cis het, but your fetch is trans. Or the examples they use in the book are things more like, hey, my older brother used to be really sweet and help me play basketball, but now he doesn't care about the family at all.
Right. And it points back with the story of Bridget Cleary included here to that social and cultural kind of underpinning of a lot of these stories. Like, this is an explanation for why people change in ways you don't like. So,
Yeah. I often feel so bad for them.
Yeah. At some point, we might have to do like a historical analysis episode, but keeping it in the game for now, we then move on to the True Fae. Obviously, these are threats. The key things, in addition to this amazing art on page 64, that's probably my favorite piece so far.
Yes! Oh
so,
my god, that piece is...
yeah. So, as we said before, they're unknowable and inexplicable, solipsistic and mysterious and powerful and all of that. And again, there are all these external things wearing disguises because it entertains them. They only do things that entertain them. But noteworthy from this part's perspective, like the true Fae, they don't really care about changelings. Like the changelings are so petrified of being recaptured, and generally speaking, unless they mess up, it's probably going to be easier for the keeper to just get a fresh human.
That surprised me. I'd forgotten that
Yeah.
they'd written that.
I don't know if that was meant to be revealed quite so early in the book.
There is an important exception, though.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, later on in the line, there will be other exceptions, but yeah, I think it's just kind of to point to the changelings anthropomorphize the keepers in a way that doesn't really fit. They don't have motivations to get their former abductees back in the way that the abductees think they do.
Right. The changelings try to make something comprehensible out of the incomprehensible.
Exactly, yeah.
And what they come up with is usually helpful, but sometimes tragically mistaken.
And the ones that do act human are the ones that get banished.
Yes, the ones who become obsessed with emotions. I love the concept of the banished.
Yeah. We then have changelings versus changelings, which suggests a few category that might be dangerous to their fellows. We have the loyal, whose keepers use them as agents, even if they don't realize it, or who betray their kind to save themselves. The sick, who become completely deranged, sometimes even lashing out at other fae. The soulless, who didn't make it back through the hedge with that little bit of humanity that they needed, for which they may have been abducted in the first place, and now they're essentially psychopaths. And the fanatical, who use any means necessary to erase anything that might attract the keepers, like trods or other fae. Alternatively, they may be doing everything they can to return to Arcadia. So these are basically Dauntain in the lost form.
Oh, the fanatical? Yeah.
Oh, no, all of them, I mean.
Oh, okay.
They're all different expressions of, yeah.
There are a couple that do not get mentioned here, surprisingly. They don't mention the privateers, which are changelings that don't technically work for the Fae, but they kidnap people, mortals or changelings, and give them to the Fae. And the militants, which are changelings that have the terrible idea of putting an army together and marching into Arcadia to take out the Fae. And they're said to use like gang press tactics to pull people into their hopeless war.
Womp womp. And then there's a bit about vampires and werewolves and whatever, but we don't care. Well, mages are bad news, but otherwise, whatever. So that was a lot. I think I'm primarily still looking, though, for like how the themes of duality and balance compare to dreaming, as well as the shapes and purposes of community. And like on the surface, you can use those words, those exact words, to describe both games, but when you dig down through this chapter, the expressions of them are quite different. And I'm down for that.
I think it's good too. It's different enough that if you ask yourself, why would I play this over that, you come up with an answer.
Yeah. So yeah,
Chapter 2. It has one of my favorite intro stories for the book.
Oh, this one was creepy.
This one is so unsettling. Person's running away from the cops and they're yelling at him and he doesn't know why. He calls out to the darkness, literally, which is a cool use of how changelings conceive of contracts, saying, hey, you got my back? Yeah, of course I got your back. He used it to skitter up a wall, and then he looks and notices that he's holding a child's arm in one of his hands. And there is a illustration to go with it, which leaves no confusion about what's happening here.
Yep. So that's our introduction to character creation.
Welcome to character creation, folks.
I'm going to read this quote in the Vincent Priciest voice that I can manage. This is from H.G. Wells' The Island of Dr. Moreau, where it says, I would go out into the streets to fight with my delusion, and prowling women would mew after me. Furtive, craving men glance jealously at me. Weary, pale workers go coughing by me, with tired eyes and eager paces, like wounded deer dripping blood. Old people, bent and dull, pass murmuring to themselves, and all unheeding a ragged tale of jibing children.
If you play
So,
a
yeah.
character in one of my games, can you use that voice?
Absolutely. I keep a
Thank you.
repository in the back of my throat for it, so uvular dexterity or whatever. Anyway, okay, character creation. We're going to fly through this. As with many World of Darkness books, we get the step-by-step thing. And because so much of this was, as you pointed out, it was in the initial New World of Darkness core book, but now it is somewhat being reiterated here.
I
Yeah.
have a problem with it because until we get to the Changeling template, it's almost word for word just stuff that you read in the core book. It doesn't need to be here. They could have just skipped to the template, or they could have done what they kind of with the prelude later and added in some more Changeling specific stuff here.
Or they could have just not had a core book. Like a new world. And I won't get into it again. So, all right, step by step. Step 1, choose your character concept, but make it lost. Step 2, choose your attributes. 5, 4, 3 across physical, social, mental, in whatever order you want. Step 3, choose your skills. 11, 7, 4. Step 4, choose 3 skill specialties. And then step 5 is the big one, where you apply your Changeling template. This will be your seeming, which is subdivided into optional kits, which we'll get into shortly. Your court, if you want one. Your weird trait that starts with 1 free dot, and which we will also talk about in a bit. And contracts, the buckets of related magics that the Fae are heir to. You start with 5 dots, at least 2 of which must be spent on those associated with your seeming or court. Each dot is called a clause, and the 5th dot in any contract costs double, the same as with other traits at 5.
Yeah, so despite them saying that, you literally could not start with 5 dots in one contract because you get only 5 points to spend.
Right.
While we're on it, there is a small error in this section. You can begin with what are called goblin contracts, which are special creepy ones, but they say that in one section they say you can take 1 or 2 dots, but everywhere else in the book it says only 1.
Yeah, I have that next to my notes. It actually contradicts itself in the same paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
After that, step 6, you get 7 dots of merits from either the core book or this chapter, which we will get to shortly.
I often house rolled it to 10.
Ah, all right, that makes sense. Step 7, determine advantages. These will be willpower, clarity, which starts at 7, but I like how you can sacrifice some clarity for bonus XP at the start, so maybe that's how you get your 5th contract. Glamour pool determined by weird, and then virtues and vices, as usual. And step 8, the spark of life, to develop narrative and notes around the dots on the sheet. There's also this little sidebar for recommended XP bonuses in if you want advanced character starts. And the overview on pages 76 and 77, the quick refs. And a lot of this we'll get to because this is just the overview. Throughout this section, he keeps saying, like, don't worry, we'll talk about this on page whatever. But yeah. What are your thoughts on the XP costs overall for NWAD? Because I find them rather steeper, and fundamentally, also because you start with like fewer dots in almost everything, except your magic in this case, it contributes to the feel of the game as, quote, street level.
I do not like multiplicative experience points in general. It causes problems, and as you're seeing here, this you could get like 4 experience points maybe in a session. If you want to buy up a...
Can we use clarity as our example? Because I'm going to have words to say about that later.
Yeah, so clarity, which is replacing morality, is new dots times 3. And you start out at 7, and oh god, yeah, there's something about clarity that
we're going to get to that.
Point is that if you want to buy clarity up a point, you have to buy it from 7 to 8, which means you have to spend 24 experience points on that, which means you have to be willing to dedicate 6 sessions at least to pick that up. That seems excessive.
It's a lot. But before we get to that, tell us about the prelude, which I always see as the most important section of any character creation chapter.
It is more... So the prelude here is more extensive than for mortals, but mostly general. I don't usually use a prelude in my own games, but I do like it when players read the prelude information because it gives them
Mhm.
an idea of how to create their own character's backstory. There's a section later on that is surprisingly in the storyteller section where they explain the elements of the prelude, the everyday life that you led before, the taking into Arcadia for your durance, the way that you escaped. All of those seem like things that ought to be in the player facing prelude section because obviously you want to use that as inspiration. It's appended by some final questions about how old are you? What do you look like? What was your existence in fairy like? What are your motivations? And then a final little bit here about if you call me imp or elf, which explains that some changelings keep their old names from being taken, others choose new human names, some go with odd names, or they'll take names from like folk ballads like Johnny Appleseed or Jack Divins.
Mhm.
There is an example of character creation too, which shows us how a Fireheart, who I think is our perspective character throughout a lot of the book, gets made.
Yeah.
Goes by Jack, though I forget the rest of him. There's a illustration of him being caught inside of a brazier that's burning, presumably in his durance.
Jack Tallow.
Jack Tallow, thank you. Yes,
Yes.
yes. Overall, I think the prelude itself is interesting, but you should definitely have your players read.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you that at least reading it is important because I always like to give XP for a well-crafted backstory. I very rarely actually run a session for it, but I do want these questions to be answered by the players. Because, like, it's useful for kind of kicking the wheels on the sheet a bit and saying, like, now, why did I take this? Does this actually fit with what I'm envisioning as the character? If you do run the game, it gives you the opportunity to, like, actually move dots around and test dice rolls and stuff, but
Also good from a storyteller perspective because
mhm,
I can tell you that sometimes I get players who build characters without considering things like where does your character live now?
yeah.
How do they harvest glamour? And if they haven't thought through those things, it can sometimes lead to players having a dissonance with the game or not being sure what to do.
Yeah. It does suggest during a prelude not to get into combat or clarity because you don't want your character to get killed or lose their mind before they even start, but maybe just make low stakes. I don't know.
I think you can have like a low stakes role for fun,
Yeah.
but I do think the point of don't kill the characters during character creation is well
Yeah.
taken.
I do really love the advice to run a scene of escape in a group prelude and then subtly change the details for each individual player, like
Oh
leaving them
God,
wondering.
yes. Oh,
So good. Because
oh.
fundamentally, it has to be more than just an info dump. You want to develop connections to the other player characters and NPCs. You want to flesh out those motivations and goals at the same time that you're developing backstories. And this gives you the opportunity to do all of that. So, after all of that, we get into the new stuff. So, first and foremost, we have weird. And this represents how much the character has been altered by the effects of glamour. The higher the trait, the more emotionally volatile and alien in mindset they become, bound more and more by superstition and story as their humanity is replaced by the logic of fairy. So, in mechanical terms, weird determines your glamour pool maximum and the maximum you can spend per turn. It's a progression that's actually quite closely aligned with like generation and blood pool in Vampire the Masquerade, so go
Mhm.
figure. It determines how much goblin fruit you can carry in the mortal world. Increasing weird allows greater recall of both Arcadia and general dreams, as well as skill in interpreting the latter. Kind of like glamour and dreaming with respect to the mists in that regard. But it also increases your visibility to the keepers and other fae. Weird also is the stat that you use to resist the magic of others and slows your aging. So then, when your weird gets above 5, though, other things happen. This is what allows your other traits to go above 5. So weird 6 lets you have attribute 6, etc. But then it starts giving you folkloric frailties akin to echoes in dreaming and creates glamour addiction. Weird greater than 5 also allows you to, with increasing frequency, incite bedlam. This is the overwhelming of others in the vicinity with emotions, and there's a whole complicated system that I won't get into here. Basically, it's like an emotional unleashing, which is neat. But like, frankly, I've never used it in a game.
Well, and the question is, how would you? Buying up weird dots is new dots times 8. You're not going
Yeah,
to...
I had a character with weird 6 at one point.
Really? How?
Yeah, it was a multi-year
2 years of
game.
playing.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
But that's also, I
shows what I
mean,
know.
you get to the actual addicted to glamour point. So it's, and you can lower your weird by going cold turkey from glamour, but it has to be voluntary, sustained, and absolute. And it's like, yeah, it's tough
Oh,
to
yeah.
really play the game with that. So,
I do want to say I love both the concepts of Insight Bedlam and the Frailties. And one thing I wish they did, which they did do in second edition, is make them accessible to characters who are not at weird 6 plus.
yeah.
I think both those add a lot of fun flavor to players.
Second edition, I think, is like more okay with flaws as a concept than first edition was. But I don't know if I really have any basis for saying that. Speaking of glamour, though,
Yeah. A quick side note: when you said it increases lifespan, I think it's worth noting that you can hit over 200 years
yeah,
of age eventually. And the book explicitly says you get a bonus to resist penalties from sickness and old age. So your changeling could be sitting there at 2 centuries and be perfectly healthy.
I mean, just imagine how paranoid you'll be by that point, though.
Oh dear. A final point to make is that the concept of weird growing reflects the key quote for me was the magic of fairy pulsing through their veins.
yeah.
It's a growing comprehension of the nature and magic of fairy, which is abstracted as this rating that increases. There was one non mechanical thing that's worth noting. Although the Fae generally do not care about you unless you're one that escaped from them, if you are at weird 6 plus, they begin to
Oh,
take
yes.
an interest in you. Not necessarily a good thing. What it means is they start realizing, oh, this thing's like of Arcadia. They're like me. And that makes them curious, which may mean that they take you, or it might mean they start treating you like one of them, neither of which is a particularly appealing thought.
No. Well, I mean, if your weird gets high enough, you might not find it appealing or unappealing. It just is. Anyway, glamour.
Glamour is the fuel, the magic, the practical expression of the magic of fairy. Now, for changelings, this is primarily drawn from the distilled essence of human
I
sentiment.
love that line so much.
Isn't it beautiful? There's so many words like this. We get the examples of the person who sits in the back of a funeral home and listens to the people mourning, and they just quietly soak in the ambient sadness. You brought up the example earlier of the person who intentionally causes a traffic jam just to anger other people.
Yup.
But it can also be more direct. Your changeling can go to a club and flirt with someone and get a response. Or be an autumn courtier who says, well, time to go pretending to be a monster again and go around just scaring people to get a quick jolt of glamour. It's a lot of fun and honestly kind of how I wish gaining glamour had worked in Dreaming because it's so simple but also so elegant. The true Fae have to kidnap mortals to generate it. It is not found in Arcadia by itself. It's referred to as being addictive, even for changelings. It's more intense than any physical experience. You'll use glamour to power most of your contracts. If you're at low weird, you might have to split that over several turns. Both your seeming and your kiths will have blessings that may cost glamour. I'm not sure all of them do. You can use it to activate tokens, which are little magic items you carry around, without having to make a roll. Incite Bedlam. Strengthen the mask, because normally
Mm.
other changelings can see what you look like. But if you spend a point of glamour, you can make it so that you just look like a mortal to everybody. Good for subterfuge. You could alternatively, it's a very dangerous idea.
We talked about this in the quick start episode, so.
Yeah, it's been all of immediately to drop the mask. Did we go over all of this? If I'm repeating literally
No,
everything, then I'm
I think
totally
the
aware.
quick start just kind of said these are the things you can do and didn't really go into it. There's a lot more detail here, obviously.
You cannot harvest it from your fellow Fae, so no going up to other changelings and flirting with them or trying to give them a fright to get yourself a few extra points of glamour. Again, no mention of gaining glamour from trods. There is
Right.
the idea that you have the goblin fruits in the hedge, so again, maybe that's it, but they never bring that up here. the goblin fruits are another way of regaining glamour. Like you eat one, you get a point of it. One thing which weirded me out is that they talk about glamour like it is a precious resource that is difficult to obtain, to the point that changelings will make pledges with people that ensure they get a supply of glamour. And I find the notion absurd because, again, you could literally just go hang out somewhere and absorb the ambient emotions.
Right.
It's not hard.
It's like they took the dreaming perspective and combined it with lost rules, and it's like, oh, it's actually really easy to get a whole bunch.
Final note, you can get some glamour from being in dreams, but it's more time consuming, and I don't really see players using it that very often. Did you ever do that?
I think like once or twice. I remember another player in the game I was in having a really good scene with it, but I don't think I ever did. We mostly just stocked up on goblin fruit. Because I'll admit, and I know that I harp on this a lot when we talk about dreaming, like, oh, people just want to go around ravaging or eating chimera or whatever instead of musing. But I empathize with storytellers who just don't have the patience to like plan it all out and everything. I do think there needs to be a happy medium where you occasionally hold players' feet to the fire and say, no, actually, you do need to role play here and engage with a mortal and explain to me how you're getting this glamour.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I have the same beefs with vampire and hunting, so.
I think we're ready to move on to clarity.
Oh, all right. So, clarity. As we said before, this is the trait that represents the balance between the mundane and the fey worlds and differentiating them, with high clarity changelings having an easier time of doing that and low clarity ones losing that distinction. I like this idea as a replacement for banality as like the cautionary trait. However, as we have said, despite them saying flat out, quote, this is not quite a system of morals, all of the moral stuff from the core book is included here in the, it's not hierarchy of sins, but they call it breaking points. So like at clarity 7, you have to make a check for taking psychotropic drugs or unexpected life changes, whatever that might be, whatever qualifies. But then also petty theft is like lumped in. Or like clarity 4, pregnancy and manslaughter. It's just like such a weird system.
Juxtaposition.
And then the mechanic, this is where it really falls off the bus for me. The mechanic is roll the number of dice indicated at each breaking point, which is clarity rating divided by 2 round up, I guess. And then on a failure, you lose a point of clarity and possibly have to get a derangement too. You roll for a degeneration or whatever. With the difficulty 8 standard in NWAD, it is very easy, in my opinion, and I don't think I can say in my experience because I think all of the games I was in, we just kind of house ruled clarity as much as possible. But rules as written, it's very easy to drop quickly. And then as we saw, it costs like an inordinate amount of experience to buy it back up. So I can't remember if there's a system later on for like clarity quick fix. But as it stands here, I was like, this is going to be a short life, a race to the bottom.
I did not play enough of Changing 1E to see that. In 2E, they went the opposite direction, and it's
yeah,
practically
2E is
impossible.
much smoother with how it handles this, for sure. Because I just look at this and I'm like, what is the benefit of this system? Like, you just be constantly second guessing yourself and on edge. And it's a lot of things to keep track of, like all of these breaking points, because it's everything at your level and below. So
I think the easy fix here is to say maybe get rid of the parts that are just brought in from the morality system from the core book.
yeah.
Keep things that are like truly ridiculous, like killing a bunch of people in a room. Like, I think that would be a clarity break. But we don't need to have stealing on that list. And they don't need to be higher sins than they were in the mortal book. I can explain the things of why they talk about like pregnancy or unexpected life
Oh no,
changes being
those
things
I
versus-
understand.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
those I
okay.
get. I do think serious unexpected life changes is like so broad that it could go in any direction. But also like minor unexpected life changes, it's like you're a PC in a role playing game. What isn't a minor unexpected life change at that point? That being said, good luck staying at Clarity 10 to begin with. Yeah.
Oh, I love the piece of art, by the way. Can we agree the piece of art on page 92 is
Yeah,
amazing?
that's a good
Oh my
one.
god.
I think they used that in the quick start too at some point because I remember
Uh-huh.
that. Regardless, high clarity gives you keen senses, including kenning, which is supernatural awareness as it is in dreaming, and low clarity gives you hallucinations, which is rough because I think you'd get down to clarity 5 pretty quick. But yeah, I think also though 2e has a couple drawbacks. I remember like somebody inadvertently reminding you of your nature as a changeling is like a high clarity breaking point, something like that. We can get to that when we get to second edition, but yeah. Anyway, clarity, nice idea. Execution, maybe. Yeah,
Tangent on that, the book talks about clarity in the opening chapter as though there's disadvantages to being at high clarity,
right.
but for the most part, it's just benefits. It gives you access to being able to detect supernaturals and that bonus on perception rolls. There's very few drawbacks to it.
Other changelings are probably like, but you can't enter the hedge, and the 10 clarity changelings like that is fine.
I think if you made it that high, you probably figured out a way around it.
One
Uh,
hopes. So tell us about merits.
Merits. Yeah, so in addition to the merits from the core book, you get a bunch of changeling specific merits. Now, they open with a list of recommended merits that you might want to take from the core book, like danger sense for noticing that something is bad, and things that are disallowed. Unseen sense is for mortals to notice supernatural stuff. You can't have that because you're already supernatural yourself. And they don't say that you cannot take social merits, but you need to keep in mind that if you were taken for any significant duration and did not slip back into your normal life, your social merits probably would have degraded in the meantime if you have any at all, or changed to something completely new.
Yep.
Then the actual merits themselves, I'm just going to kind of go through most of these pretty quickly. There is mantle and court goodwill. Mantle is how well you reflect the aspect of the court that you have joined and doubles as a form of status among your fellow courtiers. At levels 1, 3, and 5, you get minor benefits that go along with the merit.
You get a nimbus of power.
Oh, it's worth noting, if you join a court in character creation, you automatically get a dot of mantle. And in fact, mantle is the prerequisite for using what are called the seasonal contracts. So normally, only an autumn courtier can use an autumn contract. Court
Yes.
goodwill represents you're not part of a court, but you vibe with them so well. Like the winter assassin who's the person that the summer courtiers call when they need a dirty job done that you can't solve with swords and axes. That, again, acts as a sort of pseudo status for when you're dealing with that court specifically, and also gives you a more limited access to that court's contracts.
Right on.
Harvest is just a regular access to being able to get more glamour on the regular. Hollow is a delightful, gosh, it is more than 2 pages
The
long.
mini game.
Yeah, it's all about what do you want to have? You want to have like a little tree house that has an arcade machine in it and an endless supply of soda? Or how would you like to have a fantastic treetop village full of countless rooms and chambers with nearly every comfort of modern living as well as a few magical conveniences?
Why not both, since this is one of the few poolable merits?
Yes, you and your allies can put together some truly fantastic ratings in Hollow. In the CTL game I ran, they had a hot springs that had a tourist resort vibe to it. I love Hollows. They're a practical way for changelings to get away, and just also a cute way for the players to go together and have a little clubhouse to hang out at. Try Hollows. There is new identity, which is just
That's
the
it.
assumption here is yeah, if you don't have this, you ain't got no paperwork saying that you exist, so
Yeah.
good luck. And then finally, token, which lets you start off with a magical item. I will note here that there are ways that you can lose dots in things,
Mhm.
either because of contracts or other effects, or because, say, somebody steals a token for you. Second edition will introduce a concept called Sanctity of Merits, where you get those points back to spend on other things. That does not exist in first edition. So if your new identity gets blown or somebody takes your fancy token, you have lost those experience points.
But that's a story hook right there to reclaim it.
That is true. And any good game table will not just do that to you for no
Yeah.
reason. Seemings is next, I think.
Yes. Let's fly through these two. All right. Seemings are your X splat, I guess. This is determined by the shape of the trauma that your character endured and or what your keeper chose to be during your durance, like maybe some of what they were rubbed off on you. These are optionally subdivided into more specific kiths. So structurally, I like how each of these write-ups starts with, it kind of follows the same pattern. You have this familiar or familiar-ish fairy story that represents the themes of the seeming. Several examples, lots of examples. I think in one case, a dozen examples of like an individual seeming. And it gives little story hooks for each of them and then gives example appearances. But they kind of have to do this because the idea of each of these is that all of them are unique to the character, right? Like the seemings are unified in the trauma that you went through, similar to that of other changelings. But the individual expression is just that, individual. So the nature of the durance is relatively consistent. And then each seeming gets identical blessing and curse, similar to birthright and frailty and dreaming. If you choose a kith, you get a second blessing on top of that. And they all have contracts that they are associated with, a particular bucket of magic. But I think it also, yes, it also has the note that seemings aren't really social groupings at all. They are a typology rather than a community. So important to remember. And somewhat different from dreaming, I would say.
Yeah, I've always thought the categories were a little bit odd and felt like there should maybe be more, or they should be done differently. But go on. That's all I.
Characters from the same seeming will not necessarily get along. That's the important takeaway here for me. So we start with beasts. They stand between human and animal, and the instinctive, impulsive sense the latter represents. They're as varied as the animal world, with primal qualities that reflect the actual creature and or folklore around it, with archetypes like Red Riding Hood and Beauty and the Beast worked in here. They tend to be very physically oriented and solidly built, regardless of the animal they embody. They have an animal affinity and animal magnetism as their blessing, but then their drawback is that mental skill rolls where they don't have any dots have an additional penalty, and they don't reroll tens when using intelligence. Their bespoke contracts are called Fang and Talon. The kiths include stubborn broadbacks, predatory hunter hearts, nimble runner swifts, creepy crawly skitter skulks, climbing steep scramblers, aquatic swimmer skins, toxic venom bites, and aerial wind wings. So, whatever type of animal you're going for fits into one of those categories. Oh, something else that I should point out about the write ups here. Each one of them explains why that seeming thinks that they're the ones who had the hardest time getting back from Arcadia, and it's perfect. Moving on to the Darklings with weirdly larger text. So, one of the authors was short on word count, I guess, so they did that. So there are these quiet survivors who skulk on the edges. They lived in shadow and fear in Arcadia. They were stolen because they transgressed, or they were just too curious, and they now know full well how actions have consequences. Their memories are defined by the frightening and the horrific that they endured. Character creation wise, they tend to have high finesse traits and they're stealthy. They can use glamour to increase their wits, subterfuge, and stealth dice pools, but they get a penalty when in bright light or during daylight hours.
It's worth noting they don't put an explicit cap on how much you can improve the pool. So, or
Sure.
how long you can hold on to it. So, in theory, you could just give yourself an extra 5 dots of stealth or a roll if you want to feel like you're playing one of the Exalted.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get 9 again on stealth as well. So, and they have the darkness contract, obviously. Their kits are the Lore Keeper Antiquarians, the Ghost Medium Grave Whites, the Life Stealing Leech Fingers, the Camouflagey Disguisey Mirror Skins, and the Slithery Tunnel Grubs. Only 5 kits.
But I love them all.
Yeah, they're great. I also noticed something in here is like the vectors of similarity and difference within a seeming vary. So, like, beasts vary in appearance, but have very similar psychological stuff going on. Elementals vary considerably in their background, but are all kind of uncertain about their memories in the same way. Darklings are, you know what I mean? It's like, it's interesting to see how individual seemings are unified by different things in terms of their experiences. So that was just.
They do a good job of bringing out each one of the
Mhm.
seeming's unique identity.
Yeah.
I sometimes worry that if you unify everything as, well, they all just kind of wound up as animals and they're like the beast one didn't make a lot of sense to me. It was their innocence got them there, but it wasn't a drawback. And then it led to them being able to escape, but now they are more beast like. It just kind of threw me
Yeah.
off a little bit.
Some of them are certainly more convoluted than others.
I think it's something where it's easier to understand if you don't try to pick it apart like I literally just did there.
Possibly. Next up, we have the elementals. They are, rather than caught between human and animal, caught between human and forces or elements or objects. And so, to some extent, they are truly alien in their mindset even after they come back. They certainly believe they were changed the most and can truly never go back the most. In most cases, the keepers desired them in some way for their exceptionality, but not always. Their own memories are hard to parse because they were elements. As a consequence of that, they're also much more variable in build and personality and archetype than most other seemings, but they can channel their element as their blessing. So that's pretty cool. Their curse is that they get a penalty to manipulation, empathy, expression, persuasion, and socialize, and their bespoke contracts are obviously elements.
Side note, in chapter 1 they say that there's no records of changelings being changed completely in Arcadia. Then later on they say, well, that does happen, but the ones that get changed that drastically never come back. But then you get to the actual seemings where they say this person spent their time as a feral wolf, or this person was literally a fire inside of a lamp. And they do find their
Yeah.
ways back. It's just harder.
I think that ties back to what I was saying before about the subconscious awareness and understanding that even if you are not currently human, at some point, some part of you realizes that you were. But yeah,
Yeah, it makes
I
sense.
don't know. Because for the elementals are elements as you would expect. So you have the air touch, the earth bones, the fire heart, the mannequin, the snow skin, the waterborn, the wood blood. Presumably you could have other elements depending on your culture of question. They're my favorites, but I'm biased. Then there's the fairest, who sacrificed all the ecstasy of Arcadia, even as they adopted some of it, and brought back cruelty. I love the bit about them believing that grace equals leadership and that more of them are in authority than the number that know what they're doing. Like, yes, major she vibes. Uh, they're always good looking, but usually abducted for talent in addition to that. They have these fragmentary memories of bliss and agony. Obviously, social traits are prioritized over mental ones, but they don't neglect the physical either. They get a bump to presence, manipulation, and persuasion, but holy cats, their curse is that they get a -1 die penalty on dice pools to avoid losing clarity. So, talk about a quick slide. I mean, it's like the she with banality's curse. It's even worse for them.
Yeah,
Ugh.
that's pretty bad.
They also get the vainglory contracts. The kiths include the light-infused bright ones, the agile dancers, the haughty draconics, the literally floral flowerings, and the inspirationally beautiful muses. Like the darklings, I kind of wish there were more kiths for these at this point, but
I find it funny that they get the dragons.
yeah, I mean, I'm okay with it. It's just interesting. But
Yeah, I see where they were coming from. I just would not have guessed that if I had picked up the book first.
yeah, I really like the dig about the fairest of them all thing, wherever that was. You know, oh, you think you're the fairest, do you? And that they have this personal insecurity around the changeling estate. Okay, something I really appreciate about what this book is doing, and it only explores it here and there, but it's a very subtle and delicate angle of character psychology that they're exploring here. I would suggest even returning once more to the internal versus external, The complexity in Lost is much more focused on individual psychology as opposed to social structure as you see in Dreaming. You do have complex social structures in Lost, but the idea of like title and political intrigue and secret societies and like all of that, which is part and parcel for a lot of Dreaming court games, I feel like it's just less emphasized here. You can do it, but you're not really encouraged to in the same way. Instead, you're encouraged to think more about how your character deals with themselves.
I feel like they give them equal weight because, on one hand, the game spends most of its time talking about what it's like for you to adjust, but
Yeah.
they do also have that entire section about hospitality where they also emphasize that changelings will join freeholds because they need that community support and they often throw themselves into that.
Yes, but consider also that Dreaming, we literally get a full detailed description of how all 13 houses feel about each tenet of the Sealy and Unsealy codes and the cheat. It's like they go so overboard.
Okay, you got me there.
We can do a comparative chart later or something. Ogres. Ogres, I think, they're the rough ones to deal with because they suffered brutality from the traditional hags, trolls, etc., and now have become the violent brute, even if they don't look it. They're maybe the toughest to play because they embody this idea of replicating abuse. And by the description here, at least, I suppose you could have an arc of them not doing that, but it is a very delicate subject. So this is maybe like more than any other seeming, be careful how you handle this one. They tend to have clearer memories than the other seemings, almost entirely bad. They are physically oriented, but also have presence because they get a bonus to intimidate, among other things, like strength and brawl. They get a penalty to their composure, however, because they tend to be not dumb, but just kind of impulsive and gullible and weak willed. Their seeming contracts are stone, and their kiths include the deformed but astute Cyclopeans, the cryptid Farwalkers, the self explanatory Gargantuans, the often cannibal Gristlegrinders, the rocky Stonebones, and the foul and skulking Water Dwellers. So lots of the traditional sort of haggish ones.
I have 3 thoughts on the ogres. One is I love the gargantuan. I love their ability to grow to like what size 15, I
Something
think.
like that.
You
Yeah.
add your weird score to your size for the rest of the scene. That's amazing. Second is I felt like the curse was dissonant with the rest of it because they
Yeah.
emphasize that like the reason they escape is because they push through the abuse they suffer and say, "No, I'm done with this. I'm out." But then the curse is, "Nah, you're weak-willed." And that doesn't feel quite right to me.
Yeah. Frankly, I think they wanted to give them an appearance penalty and then forgot they had replaced appearance. So,
The one thing I absolutely love about this section, and I think all the kiths are, all these things are fun, is this has my favorite intro story. The one about the troll that captures 3 brothers.
oh yeah.
And
Yeah. It is good.
all of the intro stories are amazing. The way that one ends is so unsettling. If
Yeah.
anybody has a copy of the book, you've got to read the ogre intro story.
I would suggest the next one is also pretty unsettling though. So,
Ooh, the wizened?
the Wizened, where it's like,
Oh, this.
alien tropes mixed with this great chilling line, victims of pointless malice. It's like, yeah. So that's the Wizened. In their durance, they were given tasks fitting their talents, taken for usually no reason except possibly their wits, which they then used to later escape their vicious and cunning captors with guile and persistence. Their time has made them smaller and twisted. They've internalized their captor's spite, and it has become often resentment, but they're the ones keeping the wheels of changeling society going in the background. They tend to focus on mental and finesse traits, not so much strength or presence, and they are nimble but spiteful, literally have a blessing and curse that emphasizes these things. Their contracts are artifice, and their kits are pretty much their occupations that like define them. So it's artists, brewers, chatelains, chirurgeons, oracles, smiths, soldiers, and woodwalkers. I really want there to be some wry comment here about the game's take on identifying with your job, but it's late and I'm not sure what to do with that. So
I'll say that they went more in on that in second edition.
Yeah. Oh, they sure did.
It feels weird to me that in most of the Wizen write-up, it starts off with saying, like you said, it's pointless. They don't know why they were taken. They were given these menial tasks. But then you get into their contracts and their seemings, and it's very clear they're meant to be doing jobs.
Like brewing.
The brewer is fantastic.
I guess so, yeah. Do you have any particular favorites from all of these?
My favorite one from the Wizened is the Chatelaine. They're the ones who are just the perfect servants, who in fact
Yeah.
have the talent of perfect protocol, where they can nine again on any social skills where etiquette matters, even when using presents. They can get a bonus to manipulation and presence for the scene with a glamorous spend. And just the vibe, which again, they emphasize this in second edition, of these are the ones that were used to just being servants, and even now they bring that back with them from Arcadia, and I find that deeply unsettling, but also cool as heck.
The only other thing I want to say about seemings and kiths is that, the idea of whether or not the kith should be a culture-specific thing is this, I won't say source of tension, but a sticking point, I guess, between Dreaming and Lost. And I know that, like, Charlie Cantrell's C5 homebrew sort of tries to balance the two. I guess, like, there are tilts at it here. Like, often they are using culturally specific folkloric creatures to kind of represent one kith or another, but it rarely fully lines up with the actual folklore in a way that I find satisfying. I don't think they were really trying to make it that, but it's just something that I have in mind when thinking about how to hash that out. I don't know.
I agree with that. They make broad gestures towards these because I assume because they are familiar touchstones to people.
Yeah. Yeah, like they have a red cap gristle grinder. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But speaking of broad gestures, last but certainly not least, we have the contracts.
Contracts!
Yay!
So, when you were in Arcadia, you made a whole bunch of contracts, and your keeper made contracts on your behalf. The contracts are peculiar because they are made with the natural world. And what that actually means is unclear. They're not spirits like in Werewolf or astral entities like in Mage. They are they're just their own thing. So darkness is darkness and stone is stone. But the point is that because the keepers brought their changelings into the contracts that they already have, the changelings can now draw upon those same contracts to use the same kind of magic that the true fae can access. And then we get a big list of them.
Yeah.
We've got universal contracts, we have seeming contracts, and we have court contracts, which we are not going to describe all of them in great detail because while a lot of them are cool, there are way too many of them to go into. So I think what we want to do is just go down this section by section and just point out if there's like a favorite we have, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, we could just name the buckets, like...
Oh, sure. Yeah. Contracts of Dreams, it just lets you do things like hop into people's dreams easily, manipulate them. My favorite one from that, though, which is I think one of my favorite contracts in the entire book, is one where you can reach into your subject's dreams and extract an item or image from them.
That's on my list, too.
It is? Yes! Isn't that so cool?
Cobble's hot.
You can do it while they're awake, and if you pull out a body, you can wear it as a costume and temporarily look like that person.
Yeah.
This is just so cool.
Oh, we should probably also point out, just for people who have only played second edition, that these are our ranked 1 through 5. It's not the common versus royal distinction, so you do have to kind of proceed in order. So it is Dream level 4 in this case.
I just realized I forgot to explain the basic concept of the mechanics for the...
Well, it's, it spend a glamour, roll some dice.
Yes, and if you hit the... Do they all have catches?
They don't, because... Well, so, yeah, we should explain what a catch is, and then the next one doesn't have catches. So.
Yes, this annoyed me to read. So most of the contracts have catches, and if you do whatever the catch says, then you do not have to pay the glamour costs. It's a loophole in the contract when it was forged with the Fae.
Which is what it's called in second edition, just loophole.
Yeah. But like you said, then we get to the contracts of the Hearth, which are about dice manipulation. And these ones, they do not have a catch. They just have a ban that seems like something that you would never ever violate because there's no benefit to doing so.
It's purely to prevent you from stacking, right? Like, that's the only
Well, yeah,
reason.
like the reasoning makes sense on why you can't do it more than once.
Yeah.
I was just wishing that it would be something more interesting than, like, there would be some risk involved
Right.
in it.
Yeah,
There's
that's
the
fair.
drawback you get. My favorite from this list, of course, is Triumphal Fate because so the benefit is that you automatically achieve an exceptional success on an action that you designate or someone that you choose to benefit with it. That is really cool. The ban is if you try doing it again with any time limit, then it goes horribly wrong. And the key phrase here is, in fact, trying to wrangle this contract in this manner probably generates a result beyond what mere rules can suggest. But believe us, if there were such a thing as a horrendous failure and malignant aftermath on a die roll, changelings who try to contrive a situation like this would earn it.
Way to put the heavy lifting on the storyteller book.
I find it kind of entertaining. Then we have the contracts of mirror, which just let you change your appearance in subtle or dramatic ways,
Boring.
including the part where you can turn yourself into like a walking table. I think is
That's
funny,
true,
isn't
yeah.
it? Contracts of smoke, which are about stealth, invisibility, and soundlessness. Again, just I don't want to be seen, and it just feels like 5 different contracts that all say that.
Changeling obfuscate.
Then, do you want to go through the seeming contracts?
Yeah, I can. So, Artifice for the Wizened, which creates or destroys, but interestingly doesn't alter human-made objects. I checked. I was like, is it only creation and destruction? And I think it is.
Weird.
You can improve, I guess, but you can't, like, transmogrify things. Then Darkness for Darklings, obviously, works with darkness and dread and such. Equally obviously, Elements for Elementals. This gets complicated because you purchase different elements separately, so you get like the elements fire contracts or the elements ice contracts, but all of them are around manipulating said element, so lots of options.
They get surprisingly broad and specific. You can pick
Yeah,
up, in addition to the others, you might guess there's mist and smoke are a couple examples.
it implies that the storyteller kind of determines what the elemental system in question would be. So there's that too. Then Fang and Talon for beasts also varies by the animals one emulates or becomes. So you could have the Fang and Talon canines, Fang and Talon birds of prey, etc. Then Stone for ogres enhances might and strength, not very subtle, a little bit like Primal.
If you want to be a combat monster, just take the contracts of stone.
Yeah. And then Vainglory for Fairest makes one more impressive and awe-inspiring, much like Sovereign. You get a bonus if you have the striking looks merit, and I actually don't really like that. I don't like the idea of certain contracts getting a benefit from a merit when others don't, but I don't care too much about it.
After that, we get into the court contracts.
Yes.
These are split not only by the 4 seasonal courts, but also between the concept of fleeting and eternal. Fleeting is about the emotions associated with the court, and eternal is about the actual element itself. Fleeting Spring allows you to manipulate desire within other people, including Weird Face Stranger, letting you appear as whoever a subject most wants to see. And I am a big fan of the Pandora's Gift, where you can make an object that somebody would really, really, really want. Eternal Spring is about bringing growth and rejuvenation to the world. Mother of All Deaths. I do not remember reading this one. That you make the region around you extraordinarily verdant and rouses it to fight on her behalf. Okay, cool. Poison Ivy, basically.
Yay.
Fleeting Summer is all about inspiring wrath in people. Now, a fun point about all of these is that the fleeting versions all come with the ability to sense that emotion in other people for your court. So it's easy to hunt down somebody and understand if they're feeling something. And then the second tier, I think for all of them, is you can then change the focus of that emotion. So you can find somebody who's an absolutely terrible person and they have bigoted urges and they're about to unleash their wrath on something. And you're like, nope, you don't care about that anymore. You are going to be go angry at that nice expensive car that you have.
And here, have this bat that you desire. using Spring 4.
Pandora's gift.
Yeah.
My spring buddy over here. Eternal Summer lets you bring the heat and the bright sun. I don't remember if their ability to summon the sun actually affects vampires.
Oh,
But I know
I
at the
think it
very
does.
least. Yep, against creatures susceptible to sunlight, this attack may have additional effects. All
Yep.
right. Love it. Fleeting Autumn is all about fear, and it is kind of just you make people extra scared, or you tell people ghost stories and they become less scared. There's a cool picture that goes with it. Eternal Autumn, it affects harvests, autumnal natures, and weather, which surprisingly does things like you can bring something to harvest, you can wither something, you can turn yourself into a bunch of leaves and fly away. I had somebody use that in one of my games.
So that was one of my go-to contracts in the game I played. And I love, like, overall, the dramatic failure descriptions for some of these are fantastic, and especially that one where it's like, oh, your innards have transformed into leaves
Oh,
alone.
oh my god.
Don't dramatic failure contracts.
It'd be pretty hard to.
Yeah.
Fleeting Winter. This allows you to manipulate sorrow, as is to be expected. Then we go on to Eternal Winter, which allows you to create
Winter.
ice. Yeah, Winter. You know, a real interesting set to have in Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah.
Finally, would you tell us about Goblin contracts?
Yes. So the Goblin contracts are not ranked. They're just kind of out there. Well, they're ranked, but they're not like in a progression. You just buy them, generally from Shady Folk. And all of them are intrinsically flawed with this inescapable price. As it says, something harmful or problematic that happens after the contract is used. But generally, they're around luck and fate manipulation, deception, really getting out of scrapes with the trade-off of getting into possibly worse ones later is kind of the upshot of it. I think they're great. Like, it's a very monkey's paw vibe throughout. So I want to drop my favorite contracts overall from, in addition to Cobble Thought. Artifice 5, I just love the name Tatterdemalion's Workshop. Like, the contract is whatever, but just the name is my favorite name. Vainglory 5, Words of Memories Never Lived, where you tell a story to, like, rewrite memories. So much storytelling potential. Fleeting Spring 1, Cupid's Eye, and Fleeting Autumn 1, which is Intuition, which let you discern someone's desire and someone's fear. They're both super useful and level 1, and so they're easy to get. But Fleeting Autumn 1 has the catch of you can't know the person's name, which I think is just my favorite catch in the entire chapter.
It's a good one.
And then with Goblin contracts, I had a co-player who used Fair Entrance at basically every opportunity. So that was a useful one.
Wow.
And then Lost and Found, again, the level 5 Goblin contract. You can escape from almost any situation, but then your current location becomes known to another enemy. Great baked-in story potential right there.
It's a pretty good one. Really got to make sure that you're willing to take the drawback on that one. And yeah, that is all of the contracts.
Yeah, again, that was a lot, but as I said, I really like the densely rich descriptions of the hook characters for the seemings. I love the vivid descriptions of the traumatic failures in the contracts. And even though I think overall I do prefer second edition structuring of the common versus the royal, so you don't have to like follow the fixed progression, the names and everything around each clause is still really cool here. But we could use some more depth around clarity, weird, and glamour. I think there's more of that later on in the book, right? But, you know, as they stood here, I was like, oh, that's actually not that much information. So
I look forward to when we get into the other books, like you said, and get to do a deep dive or compare to second edition. I'm really going to be interested in doing that because I think we'll have some fun thoughts when we're comparing them in the moment.
Right on. Oh, this was a long one.
I think we are done for today, aren't we?
We're done the first half of this core book. So until next time, if you would like to reach out to us on social media, options include Discord at discord.me/CTP, sending an email to podcast@changelingthepodcast.com, reaching out on Facebook for the time being at Changeling the Podcast, Mastodon at dice.camp/@changelingpod. We're on Patreon under Changeling the Podcast and YouTube under Changeling the Podcast. Links to all of these will be found in the show notes to this episode. So for the time being, I have been Puka.
And I am forevermore Fetch.
And until next time...
Until next time, I hope you find a hospitable freehold for yourself.
In Waltham, Massachusetts. Or possibly Glendale, California. We quietly mark the territory of our own freehold using small cups of espresso, rose-colored monocles, impossibly tangled headphone cables, and other such trappings of the erudite podcast host placed at regular intervals on windowsills and merry-go-rounds along the perimeter. All are welcome, regardless of court or seeming or kith, unless you appear to be a particularly ill-tempered example of any of the above. Apart from such small objects, we also circumscribe our borders with social media links, such as www.discord.me/ctp, where you can converse and collaborate with us, and www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast, where you can sign up to support our show, like the following excellent folks who get a shout-out of thanks each episode. Bad Company, Derek, Dorcadus, Ellerus, Hugo the Bog Person, Ia Bull, Jason Vines, Oreo, Razgaboos, Sanjiger, Sija, and Simon Strand. We hope to see you darken, or better yet brighten, our doorstep, but until then stick to the trods, watch your clarity, and keep on dreaming.